Well, I won't back down. No, I won't back down.
Not your typical Advent Christmas song, but just take it in for a second.
Gates of hell, but I won't back down. No, I'll stand my ground.
Before we get to the hey baby, there ain't no easy way out. What a great theme for Advent, because Advent is just a word that means like expectation or anticipation. It's a time where we can consider and maybe even imagine and then actually experience that God has something for us, that we can prepare ourselves for it, that we can yearn for it and long for it and expect it to come. And maybe there's an invitation to take a theme of like, you know what, I'm not going to back down. There's no easy way out. I'm going to lean into this thing. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, and I'm still going to lean forward and grab onto what God has for me. And that's maybe the wonder and hope we bring into the conversation today as we talk about just a 3-week conversation leading up to Christmas Eve called Be Rich. And we're going to explore 3 themes of Advent. And those of you who have grown up around the church, you're like, time out. None of this is Advent themes. Advent themes are things like peace and joy and hope and love, and depending on your tradition, faith. What in the world are we talking about? Give and serve and love. Well, we'll see how these unfold, because while themes of peace may be something to lean into, there are also practices. There's also a way of living that is an Advent lifestyle. And I think these 3 words capture it. So we're going to jump in. We're going to have a conversation today. I just finished the first service, and afterwards I was like, I think that was pretty confusing. So I'm going to put a lot of expectation on you to not be confused today, because I think I am. So basically, the listener, you have all this work you have to do today. I'm really sorry about that, but I'll do my best, and we'll kind of see how it unfolds. Now, to jump into this conversation, though, we have to explore the idea that not every idea from the olden days is a good idea. All right, now, if you're my generation, how many of you grew up having every wound on your body treated with iodine? Right, it tells a little bit about the age of the room. Also, like, I'll get into the story another time, but I mean, I'm scarred by iodine, like literally scarred by iodine. I remember once pulling out of my driveway, and I had this neighbor girl. We were always fighting about everything. Her name was Katie, not the Katie on staff. And I pulled out, and we had a bike race to school, and my handlebars came off during the bike race, and I fell off the bike, and it was wild, and I was all over the ground. I was wearing cutoff shorts, no shirt, no shoes, so it was a total disaster. I was a little child. I wasn't like 25, but basically, I go home, I'm screaming, I'm crying, I'm covered in scrapes, and my mom sits me down on the counter, pulls out this red liquid, gets like a paintbrush, and just starts painting my body with iodine. And as I'm crying, she says, toughen up. It's interesting how we tell people when they're struggling how they should toughen up. Now, we're going to talk about parenting a little bit, how over the generations there were some interesting ideas about how to toughen up. Like in 1910, the idea was don't touch your baby. If you touch your baby, you're going to encourage it to be soft and not be able to be strong when it's needed. So there was an idea marketed, these oversized shoes that you could sit your baby in. That way you never had to touch your baby, but your baby could be with you. Now, of course, this shoe grew into some more complicated baby technology, but that was 1910. In 1928, there was a book circulating about how to be a great mom, and in it, this is the best picture I could find quality-wise of the Mother's Own Book and Practical Guide to Health. And in that, the suggestion was, don't give your baby a soft name. Right? At the count of 3, say your name out loud. 1, 2, 3. Super soft names. All right? If you give your baby a soft name, then what happens is your baby's going to grow up being a soft person. All right? You got to give your baby a name. And so we keep going. Then in the 1930s, if you lived in a high-rise or downtown Boise, this is like the first air conditioner, baby cages. A baby cage was something, if you lived on the 4th or 5th story of your apartment building and you wanted your kid to get fresh air, you put it out the window and you stuck your kid out there. Toughen up, little kid, get some fresh air. Could you imagine like downtown Boise right now, walking around, there's baby cages everywhere? I'm kind of glad we moved on from that one. Now we come and go baby proofing, but in the 1950s, baby proofing fell out of style. Doctors were saying to parents, if you protect your kid from getting hurt in your house, they'll grow up soft. They won't toughen up. So they've got to cut their head on the fireplace and burn their hand on the stove and pinch their fingers in the drawers and all of that, because if you baby-proof your home, you're going to raise a soft child. Now, moms, there's something for you here. So you have a child, you got this baby, you're not sleeping much, and it's 1950, it's heading into the 60s, and you're feeling overwhelmed, and this was one of the advices given. Strip the household furniture and repaint it to give yourself some purpose. All right? So not only are you raising a kid, toughen up. Time to strip the furniture, give it a new paint job, and you'll feel brand new. You'll have all the energy you need for this little child you've entered in. And that brings us to the late 60s, where it was suggested by some doctors that drinking coffee was an excellent way to toughen up your children. Drinking coffee, and one doctor went as far as to say, at 6 months, start feeding your kids eggs and bacon at 6 months. If we did, you know how much weight we all would have gained as parents if we were feeding our children eggs and bacon every day? Like 2 pieces for me, 1 bite for you. It would have been really problematic. And then we go back to a no-touching era. This one came back a lot. This was the late 60s, but the reason this came back is because we were entering into this conflict with this communist regime, and the idea was, if you touch your kids, they're going to grow up to be socialists. So don't touch your kids, okay? Now, that's really interesting. And then finally, in the 90s, we had the emergence of helicopter parenting. And helicopter parenting was popularized by the idea of the soccer mom. That was a phrase that floated around, and it was this idea: after-school activity, check. Second after-school activity, check. Weekend activities, check, check. Study groups, tutors, private coaches. This hits a little close to home because this is the world we're entering into now. But this was the idea, like if you want your kid to be tough, you have to give them all the skills in the world and all the opportunity in the world so they can handle whatever comes. But what's interesting is I'm not qualified at all to talk about how to toughen your kids. I have 4 kids. I don't know if they're tough or not. An early argument that I had as a dad with Emily was when my son got the air knocked out of him, and I was the most uncompassionate person in the world. And I heard my dad talking through me. I was like, get up. You're ruining our ice cream trip. Be tough. You just got the... And Emily's looking at me like, who's this man I married? Like, all the time. And I think I said something like, it's my job for my kids to be able to handle some pain. That sounds really dumb coming out of your mouth sometimes. Toughen up. Not everything we heard or that has been done is a good idea to repeat. So I'm going to ask you a question specific to this topic. We're not talking about parenting today. We're going to get into how do we as people handle difficult situations? How do you toughen up? Here's the question. You were a kid or as an adult, what advice did you hear to help you toughen up? So if you're a parent, like what's your go-to right now? And is it the same thing you grew up with? How would you answer this question? If you're new with us today, we do talk about a couple questions with our neighbors on the morning, so you can turn to the person next to you and you can ask this, hey, when you were a kid, what was the toughen up advice? And then we'll be back.
Almost left behind. Suitcase of memories. Time after
Sometimes you picture me walking too far.
All right, let's take a couple seconds. You've got an opportunity to reflect on this. But here's kind of the conversation as it relates to Advent. So Advent's it's a simple word that means a time of waiting and preparation. And while themes like peace and joy and hope bring us to a place of waiting, I want to dig a little deeper and go, but what does it mean? What does it mean when we're out and about? What does it mean when we're part of the Christmas season, when we're in community, in our marriages or in our singleness? What does it mean with our kids or with our parents? Like, what does it actually mean? What are some handles we could grab hold on? Some ways that you and I can wait and prepare our hearts and prepare our life experience to welcome Jesus. Because that's what's so beautiful about the Christmas season. Decoration goes up and lights go on and the music we listen to changes. And it's this unique time when we all come together and we say, you know, we're open to something new. We're ready to have our hearts restored and refreshed. And Advent, in a sense of following Jesus, is just for a season preparing yourself, slowing down and thinking deeply about what it means that there was darkness and light came into the world, and the light that came into the world was Jesus Christ himself. And so that's why I decided to start by talking about toughen up, because there's a way, like basically this, life is kind of hard anyways. And I use the word kind of because for some of you and some people, life is very hard. And for other people, your difficulties might be different, but all of us will encounter hardship in life, or we'll live next to someone who does, or we'll work with someone who does. Or if we look up around the globe, we'll go, there are people who are. Life is hard. And so in the difficulties of life, what's the message of God about how you toughen up? What is it? Like kind of just white knuckle it, grin and bear it? And I think what I've discovered in my own life is that there are questions people ask when things are difficult. And we, of course, as a culture, are coming out of a difficult season, the COVID pandemic, and then coming out of that into life slowly starting to return, and then we enter into like an economic, issue with inflation and interest rates. And I don't know, maybe that doesn't affect you at all. Other people, it affects drastically. Life is hard, and that's just the latest hard. New hard will show up, and maybe life will be really good, but there's one thing that won't last, and that's your body. You'll start to age and feel pain regularly, and we begin to move towards death, which is the ultimate affirmation that life is hard. So when life is hard, in my job, sometimes I get asked these questions, depending on someone's faith perspective. I might get asked things like, why is this happening? Or what did I do to deserve this? Or maybe as a statement, I don't deserve this. How can I stop this? And then because I'm a Christian and I'm in Christian community and we're tied to the story of redemption, I hear questions like this. Is this a sign that Jesus is about to return? Is this the beginning of the end? Is this the apocalypse? Do you think God is trying to get our nation's attention or get our attention? These are questions that you and I might ask when we're faced with difficulty. But I think we're going to go way back 2,000 years to the olden days. And this is one of those examples where what used to take place was good. And you and I want to grab hold of it and we want to carry it forward. It wasn't bad advice. It was good advice. Because what's behind these questions is a wrestle with the difficulty in life. Darkness. And the light comes in the darkness. And we have a season of Advent, of waiting. So I wrote this little couple sentences to provide maybe like a lens for clarity about where we're going to go today. So the point of today's message is that the questions we tend to ask are not the questions that the very first Christians asked when they were faced with similar situations. They had a different kind of toughness than you and I might experience. And why maybe we're moving away from like baby cages and stripping the furniture, but there is a gift waiting for us in returning to the questions the early church asked. So we're going to explore that. We're going to actually go back in history and look at how the early church handled the things that came their way. And my conviction is this. What Jesus left the world is a beautiful melody, and it's always good. No matter where you hear it or how you hear it, it's good. Even if you don't believe in it, you still hear it and you go, oh, that's good. If I'm just not sure, I want to listen to it all the time. But every time I hear it, it's good. And then if you think about Christians or Jesus or the church and you go, yeah, but that's not good. That's when that melody, someone did a cover of it and they just ruined it. And so we go back to what's the original melody? What's the good sound? The one that everybody hears and they go, that's so beautiful. And we're going to be in that space today. And what took me there is I started wondering, why do we have such a low pain threshold? And I don't know if that statement offends you. I'm applying it to all of us because I think I have a low pain threshold. I feel like we have a low pain threshold. There's just things get unsettled in our lives and then we don't know how to respond and we start to fire these questions off and the questions don't bring us towards solutions. The questions kind of keep us stuck in sort of a why, like, give you an example. So I have bogus basin tickets. And last year I skied like one half a time. Horrible use of money. Here's why I skied half a time. Because every day I'd look at the weather, I'd go, oh, it's 20 degrees. That's so cold. I'm not gonna go skiing in 20 degrees. And then a nice day would come and I go, yeah, but it hasn't snowed in like a month. I'm not gonna go ski on bad snow. Or anyone know what? And so yesterday we went up and we had an awesome time and it was cold and the snow was fine. But I thought about that, I go, so interesting. I spent a whole Christmas season. It was like mountain bike season by the time I looked up and went, oh, I missed the entire ski season because I kept waiting for the perfect day with the perfect snow and the perfect conditions and not too crowded and on and on and on and on. That's just maybe a really simple example of why I have such a low pain threshold. And we're not going to actually answer that question. I just want to give you a perspective. And I think the perspective in a lighthearted example like Bogus Basin, or in very deep-seated examples like things that we really wrestle with in our relationships with one another or the world around us, it's this. We are deeply embedded in the idea that we have individual rights. It's this unique freedom, especially as Americans. We want this for everybody. Individual rights are the key to like the life God intends us to live. But I don't think this is too self-defined. Individual rights isn't a self-defined idea because it has an expression that is universally good, and this is the expression. Personal responsibility. This is individual rights as they're intended to be expressed in personal responsibility. And I'll make my case for this in just a little bit because it can't be all about me and all about you at the same time. There's got to be a place where it comes together and there's this idea of personal responsibility. And when we start to lean into personal responsibility, we can step back and we can start to explore, well, how did the church, the very first church, how did they handle this idea that Jesus came and said, oh, you are so free. You're made in the image of God and I'm connecting you with the Father and you're returning to a place where you're intended to be. But he constantly talks about this idea of personal responsibility. Someone came to Jesus and said, what's the most important law? And he said, well, it's to love God. And he said, it's to love your neighbor. Responsibility. You have a responsibility. And I know how this plays out. This happens every time you or I come to like a four-way stop and we get there second and we wait. Because my responsibility is to wait for the car that got there first to go. This happens every time you pull into the parking lot at Costco and it's packed, it's a Saturday. I don't know why you're going on a Saturday, but you are, and you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. And what happens, you get in there and you see there's a spot right there and there's a car and you know their blinkers on and they're turning into that spot, but you have the better angle. You're going the more natural direction. And so you decide, you know what, I'm just gonna zip right in there. It's cool, everything will be fine. Most of you hopefully don't do that. Some of you might. I'm glad you're here today, but you should consider, like this idea of personal responsibility, it affects when you send parents, when you send your kids to school, you never say, hey, make sure you grab hold of your individual rights today. You say, make sure you behave responsibly today. You listen to people in your life, you respect authority, you work hard and you try. So I think this is intuitive, but when we step out of it, we start to get caught up here and it makes us struggle with how do we handle the difficulties in life? How do we handle the difficulties in life? So this is then where we go. So what questions should we ask? Life's going to be hard. Things are going to come. Things won't be the way we expect or we hope. We won't get all of the things we dream for or set out for. Our individual rights will press against our responsibility in how we live and we move and we act. So what questions should we ask? We're going to go back to the early church and we're going to see what they did in a scenario that is unmatched and I think unlike anything we'll experience, but if we do, we know how we're supposed to walk through it. So here's what was unfolding. Jesus was a Jewish rabbi and he was arrested. He was arrested, dragged before kind of a mockery of a court. He was brought up on capital charges. He was murdered publicly through crucifixion. It's a general story most of us know. He's murdered publicly through crucifixion and then he was buried. But that's not the end of the story. Because then, over 2,000 years of history, there's this movement that says, and then he overcame death. And when he overcame death, he established this new people called the church. And the church was going to go out into the world and live and move and breathe in such a way that they were going to make clear who Jesus was and what his message was and what his goodness was. And so this starts. The church is born. And they're in this area of Judea, and they're in a city called Jerusalem, and they're talking about Jesus. And then one day, a group of people talk to this guy, Stephen. So we're going to get to Stephen. And they go, we don't like how he's talking about Jesus. So they call him before a crowd and they say, hey, we think we misunderstand you. And he goes, oh, no. actually, you really understand me. Jesus Christ is exactly who I've been saying he is. We've experienced him, and he has changed the world for us. The darkness has been pushed back by the light, and so the reaction to what happens is Stephen is put to death right there on the street. Stephen is stoned, and kind of traditionally you might know the story as the stoning of Stephen. So then this happens. We're in Acts chapter 8. We're going to jump through a few scenes from the early church's formation. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. So on that day, the day Stephen dies, people get emboldened to say, you know what, these followers of Jesus are a problem, and they make life hard for followers of Jesus. They make it difficult. And we want to look at how the early church responded, how tough they were. So on that day, great persecution breaks out. All except the apostles are scattered. They're on their way, moving out and around to the outside regions. And then look what happens. Those who'd been scattered preached the word wherever they went. I struggle so much. Like in my mind, in my practice, and my hope for our church community, I don't struggle. I, Carlos, personally struggle. If this is me, this is a horrible strategy. So we're being persecuted. People are pushing us out. We're losing our homes. Hardship is coming. You know what you do? You assess your message and you auto-correct it to bring it back to a place where you're not being persecuted, and you get your home back and you get all your rights and your privileges back. But instead, wherever they went, they continue to preach the gospel. That's not me. This situation happens, first thing I'm doing is looking for someone weaker than me, stealing all their stuff. Okay? Once I have all their stuff, I'm going to find a doctor and make them heal all my friends and all my people, or kill them, all right? This is kind of how this whole thing's going to unfold. I'm going to build a city with some timbers around it with sharp points, and we're going to hole up right there. And if you come to my gate and you want to come in, I'm going to bring you in only if you look tasty. I'm sorry, this is like the end of the world now. Only if you look tasty, or if you have a skill or something I can use. Your only use to me is how you can keep me going. We do that all the time. And the first Christians never do that. Those who had been scattered, they just kept telling people about how good Jesus was. They said, look, our life's really hard. Things are tough, but we don't need anything from you. We have something for you. We have something for you. This gift, this message of who Jesus Christ is. And so as they begin to spread this message, things get more intense. And there's this guy named Paul. So Paul was at Stephen's murder. Paul was actually the one who kind of gave the thumbs up on it. Paul now, he's run out of people in Jerusalem to persecute. So he goes to the government and he gets a few slips of paper, he's like deputized, giving him permission to go all over the region and arrest anyone who's following Jesus. Things went from hard to harder. But if you know the story, Paul's on his way to Damascus, and on his way to the city of Damascus, he has a vision or an encounter, a dream. Something happens, and he sees Jesus speaks to him and says, Paul, gosh, you're so zealous and you're so passionate for what's right, but you're missing it. I'm the one you're looking for. And Paul's so difficult to explain away in the history of the message of Jesus, because he's a historical person whose life is transformed, and he now goes and he starts to speak about Jesus. There are some events that happen, but he goes and he starts to speak at length about Jesus. And on this, so now here's the picture. What we have is Christians are scattered. They've been smothered. They're being oppressed. They're desperate and dispersed. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you can still align or apply to the idea, though, that difficulty and hardship comes and pushes you out, right? So they've been scattered. And here's the thing, what questions are they asking? That's all I want to explore. How did they demonstrate their toughness? What was their response to this scenario? Luke, who's recording this story in Acts, Luke was a physician who was hired to explore the claims of Jesus, and he wrote the book of Acts and the Gospel of Luke. He became a follower of Jesus through his journey. Luke records this, so he continues on now. We're further down the road in this story. Now, those who'd been scattered by persecution, we talked about these people, that broke out when Stephen was killed. They traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, spreading the word only among the Jews. Little geography, they've been pushed about 300 miles away from their original home. They're moving into new towns, and they're Jewish. They're moving into non-Jewish regions where no one understands them. You can't get a job, you can't rent a place, they're just trying to figure out what they're going to do. But look what they're doing as they go, spreading the word only among the Jews. And then some of them, however, men from Cyprus and Cyrene, it's just two cities, went to Antioch and began to speak to Greeks also. This is a really big moment in the history of the church, telling them the good news about Jesus Christ. And the Lord's hand was with them. and a great number of people believed and turned to the Lord. I was thinking about like the end of the world. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I grew up when I first became a Christian. I was part of a community, and some of you might be this. They were like preppers. They gathered and saved up and prepared for the end of the world. Some people went and bought a compound surrounded by concrete and put crushed glass on the top. And they're like, I got to protect myself from whatever happens. But what's really interesting as we look at this, it's okay to prepare, but if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to run out of stuff first. Because people are going to come knock on your door. And you're going to say, oh, I've been saving up food for 10 years. Come on in. And that's kind of what we see unfold here. There's this idea that they look at the world pressing in around them, and all they can do is share about how Jesus has come to set every heart and every mind and every person free. And as they share that, a great number of people believed and are turned to the Lord. This isn't the winning side. Like, what's happening to the people who believe? They're being persecuted and scattered. But people are still jumping in and saying, you know what, I see this. I want to be part of this. So then let's see what unfolds next. Then Barnabas, who's a follower of Jesus, he goes to Tarsus to look for Saul. That's Paul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So here we are in the city of Antioch, in this Greek church where people are following Jesus. For a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. And it just fascinates me that all because of disruption to their life, the message of Jesus was taken out of Jerusalem and taken to Antioch, and a new church was started. And this Antioch church is really important because it's the church that the churches we're all part of today came from, in essence. A new church was started. A great number of people were taught by Paul. And then here's a phrase, some of you probably know this, but the disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. Jesus, when he established his followers, he never said, you're going to be called Christians. Didn't have a naming and branding meeting, and people threw out ideas, and they did some brainstorming sessions, and they came up with 10 key indicators and reduced those down to 3 words. And he's like, all right, what are we going to be called? And I don't even know what that would be, but basically there wasn't a thing. They were just called people of the way. That's just what people called them because they followed the way of Jesus. But in Antioch, something happened. 300 miles from where the whole thing started, in Antioch, they become Christians. Not a compliment. It was a put down. The people would go, oh, there's those Christians, those ridiculous people who are always talking about this, that Jesus rose from the dead, and they're so weird because they do something nobody else has ever done. And this is going to be our Advent practice. This just means like little Christ or follower of Jesus, Christian. And it was first given as a derogatory term to people who follow Jesus. So what was this thing that they do? Well, a little time later, some people show up to this church where they're called Christians, and this unfolds. Some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. These people are kind of like predicting what might come. One of them named Agabus, which, by the way, is a total kick-butt name. If you're having a child and you haven't named it yet, Agabus, that's a strong name. No socialism there, right? Like boom, like starting quarterback, Agabus, Davidus. I don't know, it just works. One of them named Agabus, I hope there's a sweeping curve of kids named Agabus, stood up and through the Spirit predicted that a severe famine would spread over the entire Roman world. So here's our context. Not only are they scattered, not only are they oppressed, not only are they persecuted, not only are they name-called, then the world's just going to get harder too. Nothing to do with faith, just a famine's going to come. This famine's going to spread over the entire Roman world. And this is the key right here. These first century believers, remember, not everything that's old should be rejected. There's many things from the past we need to lean into and grab hold of. So these first century believers, 2,000 years ago, they lean into this terrifying, devastating news because famine was life or death. There was no storing up things for yourself. If you were not at the top of the food chain, you were done. They didn't ask, like, what does this portend? Is this a bad omen? Whatever kind of language they would have used. Is God judging Rome for being obsessively and excessively cruel? They didn't ask any of those questions. They ask questions like this, and we don't see their questions recorded, but we see their actions recorded. And theologian N.T. Wright, during the pandemic, he posed these 3 questions as an observation in historical Christianity. He said, what questions should you ask? This, I think, is beautiful and applies to both followers of Jesus and people who might feel irreligious or following different faiths. These questions are good, but they find their ultimate meaning in Jesus. Who will be at risk? So they ask themselves, who's going to be at risk? How can we help? And who should we send? These three questions are your Advent to kick off December. What if we waited for Jesus? What if we expected the experience of Christmas through the lens of looking at the world around us and saying, who will be at risk? Because this is what the first Christians did. And we should lean back to that original melody. And we should grab hold of it. And we should play it to the best of our might. How can we help? Who should we send? Now, you should be asking the question, but where did that all come from? Like, what do you mean they did all of that? Well, this is what took place. After Agabus prophesies, these Christians in Antioch, the disciples, as each was able, decided to provide help for their brothers and sisters living in Judea. This they did, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. So they find out there's going to be a famine, which is going to affect them. And they go, who's going to be at risk? And they go, you know who's going to be at risk? Our brothers and sisters living in Judea, because they've already lost everything. They're even more vulnerable than we are. Now, when I say brothers and sisters, you might think like, yeah, I've been to a church in New York once, or yeah, I have a friend who's living in. No, they didn't know each other. They never Zoomed together. There was no connection between these two except the message that these people received in Antioch, they got from these people in Jerusalem. They were Jewish and Gentile. They had ethnic differences, but they were united around Christ. They decided to provide help. Who's going to be at risk? The church in Jerusalem. What can we send? Each one, as they were able, put up a collection. Who can we send? And they sent Barnabas and Saul. And here's to me, like, if you're listening to all this, like, yeah, of course. There's a trouble, be nice. But this wasn't the way the world always was. Jesus gave the world that you and I live in the gift of this idea of helping those in need. It wasn't a popular idea when Jesus came and lived and walked among us. So much so that Teresa Morgan, who writes about very exciting book, actually, if you want a good read, but Popular Morality in the Early Roman Empire. Okay, so she writes about this. Listen to how she describes the early Christians. Christians are taught that God loves them absolutely, and that on that basis they can trust in God and love God. And because they're given such abundance of love, they can afford to love one another with enormous, unreserved generosity. Now, here's what happened. The church in Antioch was loving the church in Judea. That was the one another, the other Christians. But then what happened with Christianity is they went, we still have more to give. Let's not just give it to our fellow Christians. Let's give our time and our energy and our love, and let's give it to our neighbors, and let's give it to the poor and the least of these, and the orphan and the widow and the plague-stricken. Let's give to the outcast. And they just kept giving and giving and giving. And what they discovered is they never ran out. And the church exploded from zero to millions in the first 100 years, and then to tens of millions in the first 300 years. Not with the kind of message you usually grow something on. What we have, we give away. The gifts we've been given, we give to you because we have received such an abundance of love. Teresa goes on to say, that is a completely different model of relations with your fellow human beings and how your relationship with God affects your relationship with other human beings. In the Roman world, if you were struggling, it was because the gods were punishing you. And if you were a good person, you wouldn't get in the way of God punishing people. That was the system. And these Christians, they completely disrupt that system by saying, you know, Jerusalem's 300 miles away. It would take us, if we walked 20 miles a day, 15 days of 20-mile-a-day walking through treacherous terrain to get this little offering we have to these people we've never met. We don't even know their names or anything about them. We just know they're also part of this family. So we're going to do it. So they took that journey, 20 miles a day. We don't know how long it took them, but if that's what we did, that's how people traveled for pilgrimage. It'd be 20 miles a day over 15 miles. The Gentiles, the people in Antioch, they thought Jews were really strange. That didn't stop them from helping. They could have easily excused themselves from helping because they also were going to experience a famine. That was also going to be their story. And yet they kept going and they introduced to the world what I think is a gift of Advent. It's this word right here, caritas. Now, I was going to make a joke about carnitas because some of you went there, but we're going to go back. Caritas. Caritas is just the Latin, came from caritas, became the Latin, and eventually in Old French became charity. So this is a little etymology of that word. And when we look at Caritas, this was a dig. Ugh, that person keeps helping people. They're so lame. That's how it played out. Now we don't think that way. Whether you're a Christian or not, everyone's like, you should do good. Like I have nonprofits, giving, Christmas toy drives, everything's on the table, but it has a point of origin. It didn't exist until the church in Antioch took up an offering and gave it to the church in Jerusalem. And charity or love in practice became a common human experience. For some of you, I want you to test that. Did it exist? I'm trying to give you a historical framework here right now. You can't find a recorded incident of what happened in the church of Antioch anywhere in human history where a group of, you can find a single person doing good. But you can't find a group of strangers taking up a collection for hurting people and bringing it to them for no reason other than to help them. It was countercultural. And so when I think about how they gave us this gift of charity, and then that let me get past my thing here. That gets me to why we're talking about give, serve, and love. Because the first gift you can receive in Advent is the gift of a relationship with Jesus Christ. Out of that gift, you realize your arms are overloaded with too much, and more than you could ever know what to do with. So you just start to give it away. You start to give, because you've received this gift, you just start to give. Now you can circumvent that part. You can skip the Jesus part and give away, but there's a shadow side to that. Sometimes you start to go, people don't appreciate me for all the good I do. Or I do these things because they make me feel good about myself. Or maybe you're more virtuous than that and you're like, yeah, this is good to do for humanity, but you're giving from a limited resource pool. Whereas in the give dynamic, the charity dynamic, the love dynamic that Jesus introduces to us in the first church, it is you have more than you could ever imagine. So you just keep giving it away. Famine, that's okay, give it away. Pandemic, that's okay, share your toilet paper. Whatever it is, like just give it away, give it away. And so that's why I'm calling our Advent series Be Rich, and that's why it's a little different, because I want to give you 3 habits, 3 attributes, some sets of questions that you can ask to put this principle into play. So here's Paul writing to his friend Timothy. And he says, look, command those who are rich in the present world to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. Charity, born out of the church, shared from Antioch to Jerusalem to a group of strangers, and changed the world. I love in this community, I don't want to brag on you, I just want to talk about history. The I Believe Project, 14 years, but it wasn't always in Wilder. So really a solid decade in Wilder. And when I look at the I Believe Project, a lot of you brought boxes in this morning, up to 500 boxes. Now I think about this. How did we get here? We didn't just say, hey, we should do something for people because it's Christmas. Who's at risk? You know what? There's students and families in the Wilder community who are at risk. What can we send? Well, let's connect with them and see how we can be part of helping that school district. We don't know them. I don't know how many of you hang out and have dinner with people from the Wilder community in the school district there. Maybe some of you do, but that's our relationship with them is not the driving thing. What's the driving thing is the abundance of gifts that we've been given through the love of Jesus Christ. And we go, I've got so much. I have so much. Who's at risk? A community across the valley. What do they need? Warm hands, a hat, a new toothbrush, a gift card to get something for mom or dad or their brother or sister. What do they need? It's like the answer is pretty simple. What can we send? What can I do? I can do a box or 2, or I can't do any, but I can do part of 1, or I can come wrap. I can be part of that, or I can deliver. I was thinking about how that be rich in good deeds is played out over this community. I want to give you some numbers. And I want you to hear really, really clearly, even if you don't like it. This isn't a pat on the back. This is an affirmation of who Jesus is and what he's called his church to do and who he's called us to be. Because if we want a pat on the back, then we need to add more zeros on the end of the giving and more zeros on how many kids, and we just need to go, 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 go. And at the end of the day, we're going to miss the point if that's our approach. So this is what's happened over 13 solid years of sponsoring kids in school. 10,000 hours. What can I give? You've given 10,000 hours as a community to collecting boxes and delivering boxes to the Wilder community. And you think about it, that's a lot of hours. That's a lot of time that you could have been doing other things. But your arms were so full with the gift of God that you said, yeah, I can do this. I'm the worst. My wife's like, let's go do the boxes. And my first thought was like, ugh, this is the worst. And then I put a smile, but I don't show that. I've learned. I put a smile on. And I'm like, this is the right thing to do because it's just 10,000 hours. And you know what else is interesting? $250,000. $250,000 have flowed in generosity from your pockets to a community of people you don't even know, you'll never even meet. That's the charity or the give of Jesus Christ and what it looks like. And that story can go on and on through uplift projects that we do here, through our first a clean water project with Life Water that we were able to sponsor a few years ago, to the almost 20 years long partnership with Kenya Kids, which you'll hear more about in and out of the year, but it's a partnership that helps kids in a region in Kenya get support and education. And you look at all of that and you go, it all stems from three questions. Who's at risk? What can I give? Who can I send? I want to give you an invitation real practically for Christmas Eve, how we're going to practice Advent. So we have a long-standing partnership with Frank Church High School. And Frank Church, if you've been around Eastman for a long time, there's different ways this partnership is played out. Right now, they've invited us. They've said, here's the deal. We have students that we would love them to be at school regularly. If you're a mom or a dad, you're like, wait, what? These kids are not living in a traditional home environment. They're living in shelters. They're living in cars. They're living in a friend's house or a neighbor's house. They're living on the street, a handful of their students. Those students, it's difficult to get yourself up in the morning and go to school. But they found if you reward kids with a box of cereal, they'll get there. And so they said, hey, Eastwind, we know you guys are out on the other side of town, but do you think you could help us get a bunch of boxes of cereal? So Christmas Eve, if you're going to be part of Christmas Eve here, we want you to walk in the door with like arms of cereal. We'll give you the top 10 cereals they like. Walk in, and before you sit down and enjoy your Christmas Eve service, we're just going to pile them up. And then that next week, we're going to put them in a van, and we're going to drop them off, and Frank Church is going to say, we have enough cereal to get us all the way through to the end of the year. Like, we're going to make it. So if you're going to be part of, I go for it. I mean, I love that. So this is so, like, can we just pause for a second? Captain Crunch, this is the big thing Jesus did? Who's at risk? What can I give? Who can I send? This is going to play out practically amongst our neighbors. It's going to play out in your heart. It's going to play out around your Christmas table and in your family. It's going to play out in your neighborhood. It's going to play out with your employees. It's going to play out with your employer. It's going to play out across on your social media. Like, I want you to take these three questions. I'm not giving you the answer. I'm saying I want you to take these three questions, put them before God and say, God, right now I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's a famine, whatever that is. And I want to say, why is this happening? And I want to go, how do I stop it? But the early church said, who is at risk? What can I give? Who can I send? And year over year over year, more and more people believed in Jesus Christ, and brings us to where we are today. We even see this language echoed in John, who was one of Jesus' close friends. He's writing to the church about what it means to follow Jesus. There's like no quarter in his words. Pretty straightforward. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. We've been given the gift. Starts with receiving the gift. Jesus laid down his life for us. He gave us the gift of eternal life, of restoration to God. And we ought then, there's an if then, we ought then to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. And then he gets real practical. If anyone has material possessions, but they were living in an age where it was all about getting a bowl of soup. For us, I would say if anyone has an abundance of time, money, affection, love, hard work, an abundance of something you can give to someone to say, I see you, I'm giving you the gift God has given me. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And if you were with us through the James series, it really feels like these two guys were talking. Like your faith turns into an action. Your faith turns into an action. So I want to give you a closing question, and we're going to sing a closing song and head out for the day. Do you need to receive the gift that Jesus offers? And you can come and go and not do that. But I hope you'll spend the month of December wrestling deeply. What if I just started there? What if I didn't jump right out to doing good, and I really wrestled with Jesus, who he says he is, what he says he offers, who he says I am? Is that a gift I can receive? Do you need to receive the gift that Jesus offers? That's a question to ask. Or do you need to offer to others the gift you have received? Who's at risk? What can you give, and who can you send? I'll just give you a moment to reflect on that before we close out today.
my ability.